All right, we're back, and it is COMP2007, and it's summer 2016 semester. It's week 13, part 2 of our broadcast, and we're continuing with our web API. We just finished doing our service and controller for the genre, for the index genre list, right? That's what we did here. And what we want to do is continue with this and go on to the next piece of functionality. I want to add some more stuff to our home controller because that's where we're going to have a lot of our stuff happening, home controller. And our home controller is the home controller that lives inside of our ASP.NET portion of our website, right? We're going to scaffold a couple of these things out. So let's build out a couple of more action results. So one of them is this public action result, and it's called browse, right? We kind of duplicating what we did last time. With an ID, we're going to listen for an ID, and just to see what it's going to look like, it's going to do one of these: get, and it's going to go home, browse, and then it's going to be 1. So we're going to look at the first item inside of our genre, right? And what we're going to do with this is we're going to say this. We have access to the genre model, so we're going to say var genre, lowercase, is equal to db, that's our database connection, dot genre, dot find, capital F, ID. So we're going to find the ID. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, now we could always check to see if it's a null, but for now we'll keep it simple. We'll just say something like return a view. We'll turn our genre to that view. So that's what we're going to do. So we're taking the one that we find, whatever matches the ID, and we're returning to the view. Let's also get prepared for the future because I also want to have a details view, right? So let's do that too. So we'll say get, and we'll say home and details, and then it'll be like 5, right? And public action results, and details, and we'll pass another integer ID. This time what we're going to do is instead of our genre, we're going to look at albums, the album detail. So album is equal to db.albums, right, dot find. We're going to find an ID that matches that album. And then we're going to return a view with the album that we found, if we found one. Again, we could put some validation in there so if we don't find an item, it doesn't crash out. But for now, we just keep it simple. So a couple of additional action methods is what we want to put in. All right, what I want to do is I want to scaffold out each of these actions, right? And then change some of the stuff that's been automatically put in there with our own, right? But at the same time, keep in mind that these 2 action methods are going to be the other 2 pages we're going to make, right? For now. So let's right-click on Browse. We're going to add a view, an MVC view, add. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, well, this is empty without a model, right? But I'm going to change that. I'm just going to say empty, and I'm going to choose the model class as genre. So we're going to go down to genre, and we're going to leave it as empty, browse, and then add. That's going to scaffold out that view. So we have our browse view now. So far, not doing anything. And what I also want to do is where it says view bag title, I want to get rid of this. Actually, we'll get rid of all this up to there. And we'll define a view bag for the browse right here. So we'll say something like, view bag title is equal to, we're going to browse for an album list, right? We're browsing for each album, right? For each album in the list, right? So albums by genre. That's what we really want to look at, right? That's what we're looking at. So browse albums. We'll say browse albums by genre. Okay. That's what this page is going to be about. This page is all going to be about the details. So this is album detail down here, right? That's what it is. So we'll wait for this to finish. And we'll do the same thing for the view bag in here. We'll say view bag dot title is equal to album details. Okay. There we go. If you really want to, you can put in what album it is, but for now, this is good. All right, let's scaffold that one out too. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add view, and I'm going to do another MVC view. This time, you know what? Just to keep it simple, let's use MVC's scaffolding system. So we'll have like 2 that are done with Angular and 1 that's with MVC. That's the regular way of doing it, because you can mix and match that way if you really want to, or you can, you know, kind of use a hybrid of a bit of both. So let's go details, and we want to choose our album. So we're going to album details, and click add. Now this is going to add quite a bit of details in here. We got to figure out what we need and what we don't need. We don't need this, so all this can go. Actually, the H2 can become an H1, and we can put in our view bag title in here. So we can say at viewbag.title, and we can get rid of all this up to here. And what I want to do with these ones is this is on details.cshtml. I want to do at using, I like doing this a little bit more, dot models, and then, oops, we don't need that. And then what I want to do is I want to say the model is actually the album model, just to make it clear. The album model. Okay, this stuff is, again, it's all Razor syntax. We can leave this alone, except for down here. Let's get rid of the edit. We don't want this to be any kind of editing capability. Back to list is okay. We'll leave that there. This is our kind of a really small scaffold for our objects, for object details. Okay, so this is done. Let's go to the browse one. We need to do some more things there. This is just prep for what we're going to do in a few minutes. Using comp dot models, and what we want to do is, again, our model is genre, right? And what I want to do here is something very similar that we've already done with our other stuff, right, already. See if we can get to that piece. So what I want to do here is for our, when we browse for our genre, we want to do albums by genre is what we want, right? So what I want to do is here is go to another div tag, right? We want to have a class, right, of column dash medium dash offset. Just we did before 3, and then column dash medium dash 6. Okay, and that's in our div tag. We also want to have inside of that an H1 tag, right, which we're going to put in our view bag title. And then next to that H1 tag, we're going to have a UL, another list with the class of list group. So we're going to have in there list group. And inside of our list group, or UL, we're going to have a list item with a class of list group item. We've done this before. And then inside of that, we're going to have an anchor tag. And let's press tab. Looks like this. So our H1 is going to be an at viewbag title. Our UL class is going to stay the same. That's not changing. Our div tag, though, is going to change. We're going to have a little more complicated controller. We're going to say ng controller is equal to our, again, this is albums by genre controller. It's kind of a longer controller name, right? Now, we also want to be able to pass data from this view back to the controller. And the way to do that, of course, is to use ng, right, ng-init. ng-init, what it does is it allows us to call a method inside the controller scope. So we can say, well, we're going to call the init method, but inside this stuff, we're going to actually use our model, right, dot name. So we're actually going to use our razor syntax to pass model data back to the controller. We'll talk about why. We're going to do this in a second. All right, same thing with our list item. We have we're going to repeat this stuff. So we're going to say ng-repeat, ng-repeat, and we're going to say for every album in albums by genre dot albums. Okay, I'll explain that in a second. So we'll put this to the next line. In our anchor tag, we want to access the home controller again, and we're going to go back to the details view we just defined, right? And a couple of mustaches there. We're going to say album.album ID is the path, right? Album ID. And then for the link text, it's going to be album.title. Right, that's pretty much it in a nutshell for our little view. Let me explain what we're doing here. So remember that we have a home controller. And the home controller, just to give you a hint again, it's listening for a browser ID. The browse ID is going to come from the genre list. We already have that. When we run the genre list, we have a list of genres. We have the number of albums next to it. We click on the genre. It gives us an ID to browse. And then what we do is we send the genre model into the view. But what we're sending here is actually the ID of the genre that's being teleported to the view itself, right? So if I go back to the view, right, the browse, here's the view. So now when it comes to here, it's got the whole genre object, right? And what I want is I want to share the model name inside my init method. Okay, that's what's happening. Now you might say, hold on a second, why don't you just share the model ID? Well, because there's a reason for this. Remember, we want to get back, we want to have a URL that comes back to us with albums by genre. Do we have such a way of getting data back right now? Even if I built a controller, I don't. Remember, all the data gets scaffolded in the ASP.NET Web API controller, which is here. And it's in the albums controller. Let's take a look. I have our albums controller. We have get album, right? But we don't have get album by genre. We don't have that. So we need to kind of create that here inside of our albums controller, which is inside of our controllers folder of our web API, the ASP.NET stuff, not the Angular stuff. Because this is going to give our JSON data. It's going to filter our JSON data for us. We don't want to filter JSON data beyond what this gives us. This is the best way to do this, right? All right, so let's create another task that we're going to use, but it's going to be very similar. We're going to overload this method and create our own. Okay, how we do that? First of all, what is it going to look like? It's going to look like this: get API, and then we're going to say albums, and then it's going to be question mark genre equals to, I don't know, rock. That's going to be what it's going to look like, right? Okay, so in order for me to get that going, I need to set the response type. And the type of, if I can actually type that up, type of response is going to be, or the type of object is going to be an album type. Need that for Web API. And then we're going to say it's an asynchronous function. So we're going to say async. Remember, there's both synchronous and asynchronous versions of the same function all the time. We're going to say async task, interface with HTTP action result, right? And we're going to use the same name, get album. But instead of having an int, we're going to have a string that's going to give us a type of genre. Okay? All right. Now we're cooking. So get album is going to return some kind of task result, right? In fact, what we want it to return is something that looks like this. Okay, and then pass in something else. Right now, we're not passing in anything. Again, this is for, we're going to test this before we actually run the rest of this stuff, because if you don't have this, we don't have anything. Okay, let's take a look. So how do we do it? What do we really want to do here? What we really want to do here is we want to say this. We want to say, hey, I want to retrieve the genre and its associated albums. That's what we want to do here, as we've done before, right? From the database. That's what we want to do. We want to retrieve the genre and associated albums from the database. Okay, cool. So how do I do that? I want to say var. So we're going to use the var keyword this time. I want to say albums by genre. That's what we're going to call the variable. And we're going to use the await keyword. Await is basically used with async functionality. So we're going to await for db.genres, and we're going to include a reference to the related albums, right? And we're going to say single async. Try this again. After this, single async. There we go. And we're gonna have an anonymous function or a lambda expression that's going to say, look, hey, return an object of type genre with a name, right, that equals to the genre that we got from the URL. Oof. We'll put this on another line so you guys can see it all. I guess what it looks like. So, okay, make an albums by genre object, which is a type of genre, right? We're going to wait for the database to return from the genre table a list of albums that match, that have a genre with a name of the genre that we got in from the URL, this one. Once we've got that, we're going to return that to the view. Actually, there's no view. It's going to return back out. This is going to return JSON data. Let's take a look and see how we can get that. Let's look at that, what we get for that. So again, I'm going to run this thing. And I always try and test this thing like one step at a time. So I'm sitting there, okay, well, do we have this functionality? Can I do my filter, right? And the way to test that, of course, is to do something like, again, API albums, then question mark, where genre equals to rock, right? And if I press enter, I should see JSON data like this. Now let's check to see if this is correct. Remember, I can't tell. When I look at this, I'm like, well, I don't know, right? Look, there's like a billion pieces of data here. I don't know. And it's not even that big of a database. I'm going to copy this stuff. I'm going to go back to JSON Editor Online. I'm going to paste it in and then pass it over and see what I get. This is neat. I get 4 objects. I get 111 albums, right? And each album has different data. This is exactly what I was looking for. So it did exactly what I wanted to. It filtered all the albums by genre, right? So now that I have that on the back end, I have the URL path that I'm going to put into my service, because my service has to go somewhere. It has to kind of get data from somewhere, right? So I'm kind of doing it backwards. I'm saying, hey, let's set up the service first, and then set up my service class to kind of go and get it. Okay. So now that we have a working service, Web API service, that gives us that filter, right? Now we can continue working on our stuff. So albums controllers is done. All right. Let's build up our controller now for the albums by genre. Now this is important to do this properly. So this is, if I hover over this, this is the services, this is the controller. Let's get this piece. And it's going to look very similar to what we've already done. App.controller, right, as an example. We're going to call this the albums by genre controller. Woo, big, big, big. And we're going to say that in block scope again, that the scope variable, right, for Angular and albums by genre service are also requirements, right? We're going to send those two things into the constructor as well. So we're going to say, hey, send in the scope object as well as an albums by genre service. Okay, cool. So now we're going to open up a bracket, close this down, close the square bracket, close the round bracket, close. Okay. That's the outline for my controller, albums by genre controller. Okay, remember what we talked about before. I want to be able to pass information back here. Why? How is it going to know what I've clicked on? It doesn't know what I selected, right? My controller will not know what I selected. I have to tell it that I've selected it somehow. In order for us to do that, we have to go back to our browse. Notice that I've got this little init method. ng-init says, hey, call the init method that's built into your albums by genre controller and pass in this information, model by name, model name, which we're getting from our Razor syntax. So this is where the two meet, all right? And if I go back to albums by genre, right, you can see that I'm going to set that up. I'm going to say, so this is what I want to do. I want to pass genre object into the controller, right, and call the, say, get albums by genre function. I want to do. So now I want to use two, because I can't go to the next line without doing one of these. So this will be a little comment. And what I want to do here is I want to do the following. I want to say, hey, let's set up a scope. Here's our scope object that is just a anonymous, we'll use this one, this kind of syntax. Anonymous function that takes a genre a parameter of type string. That's what this is. This is a function, a method, if you will, that's part of this scope, this controller scope. And inside there, what I want to do is I want to call the get albums by genre method and pass in the genre I just got. So I got this from the HTML page. I'm passing the buck, almost like I'm giving it to the next function. Why? Why don't I just pass this whole thing to the next function? Well, the problem is that it's impossible. Like the scope is so whacked in this example that if I try and pass the genre to some kind of object out here, it's not going to work. It's going to give me undefined. It's going to give me all kinds of fun. Even if I try and use lambda notation to keep the this reference, won't work. But this works. So that's why I did it. So let's go on now. So I'm going to say function. We're going to name that get albums by genre. We haven't defined that, so get albums by genre. There's a get albums by genre method. We're going to request another genre object, which is of type string. And it's going to, of course, return void. That's what it's going to do. And what I want to do is do the same thing I did last time. I want to use the let keyword to call albums by genre service, right? Which is equal to albums by genre service get albums by genre. We don't have that method so far defined, but we will. Right? We will have it. Notice it says there's a bit of an error here. It says in there, but it's because it's broken over two lines there. So just sometimes it kind of glitches out that way. The compiler, just leave it alone. All right, so that's the first piece. And then the next piece, like we saw last time, was to use the call object. So call album by genre service. And we're going to get the promise back that says something like, here's an anonymous object, which is of type response, right? There's the response. And we're going to use a fat arrow function, right, to basically define what the response does. And we're going to say something like this. We're going to say our scope object dot albums by genre, all lowercase, right, is equal to our response object dot data. There we go. I'll explain where I got this in a second. And then maybe we'll have an error like we did last time. Maybe we'll have one. And what we want to do is use an anonymous function to kind of control the error scope. We want to say something like console.error. I want to say something like something went wrong. Something went wrong. Oh. Okay, we can put more details there if you want. I want to close this up with a round bracket and a semicolon. All right, so what's happening here? This is the controller. So why do we do this? Why do we pass this in? Because we need to be able to get something back from the browse CS HTML. How would you bring it back anyway? What are the other methods you can use? There are other methods you can use to read it back, right? But this is one of the ones that works nice, right? Here's the next one. Notice that I have albums by genre, lowercase, dot albums. Well, this is where we're getting that syntax. We're getting that context here, right, where we created albums by genre as a variable inside the scope of the albums by genre controller, right? And we're assigning it to the response data we're getting back from our service. Now, we don't have a service yet, but we will in a second. Let's build that out too. So we're going to go to the service piece. And it's going to look very similar to what we did already, but there's going to be some changes because it's going to do a search by genre. Let's do that. So we're going to say app service. We're going to pass in the name of the service, which is albums by genre service. And then we're going to say an anonymous function that's going to carry forward the HTTP context or service or provider, right? And we're going to close it off. That's our scope of our service. And now we're going to say something like this dot get albums by genre, which is a new method, is a anonymous function that also takes a genre object and returns a HTTP GET request. But let's just do, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to say let URL path, in this case, which is a string type, equal to API, that's the URL. Remember we did this already? Albums, and then genre equals to, and then plus genre. That's what we're going to get from the web page. And then we're going to return our HTTP object with a GET request, and we're going to pass in the URL path. That's it. We've done our service. So again, just a takeaway from this one. I know you're watching, and I'm going fairly quick, but there's two pieces. There's the controller, which is the business logic, and the service, which reads the data, the JSON data. Again, we just established this last URL inside of our albums controller. This albums controller right here. We established a URL. It didn't exist before. We made this URL just now. It's got the ability for us to filter. If we came here to this service, what would we put here if we didn't put that? We'd have to get data somehow. So sometimes we need to build it on the other side. That's the routing that ASP.NET Web API gives us. Okay, let's test all this out. Lots of changes, and let's see if it all works. Maybe it'll work. It won't work, and it's failed a couple times today, I have to say. Let's do this thing. So, okay. See if we're okay. We got our list. If I click rock, this is the most difficult one to get. And then I'm waiting, and there should be a list of rock albums right here. And if there's not, like I'm not getting a list, by the way, it happens every time this way. I got to check to see what the error is. Let's see, take a look at what the error is. Inspect. Sometimes it's like funny errors. Okay, here's one. Failed to load resource. The server responded with a status of 500, internal server error. HTTP localhost 2060, API albums genre undefined. What the hell? How come I'm getting an undefined there? That doesn't make any sense. Something went wrong. Do. right? Okay, so why am I getting an undefined? How do I fix that? Let's see what's happening. So we're getting our genre string in there, and let's see when we're getting, how far we're getting our data. So I'm going to go back to albums by genre. Albums by genre. Let's make sure it's spelled properly. .ts, albums by genre. And let's see what our, I also want to see what my bundler says, because sometimes that's just spelling errors. And let's see what our bundle config says. It says albums by genre and albums by genre, no problem, .js. Controllers and services, right? So make sure that that's all correct. Controllers under scripts. Here's controllers and services, yeah. Albums by genre. Very important to make sure those are all correct. And it looks like our bundle config isn't the problem. All right, so what's the problem? How come we're not getting any data? Well, let's see what we get. Do we get it here? Before we go to our album, can I see the genre data here? Can I go to console.log? And can I see the genre data? If I can see it here, that means it's somewhere below, right? So we're going to keep on troubleshooting. All right, let's try this out. So there's this piece, and we'll run it. And we want to get to that second piece and see if we get any kind of code hinting whatsoever. We're getting this thing that says, hey, Tom, you're out of bounds, but don't know where that out of bounds is. Okay, let's hit on rock, and then let's go into inspect and take a look what we got. Oh, we got rock. So we are getting it. At that point, we're getting rock, no problem. So it's coming into the controller. So from the HTML to the controller, we're good so far. All right, let's see what's next. So as it comes into the controller, does it get into the passing? No, I'm passing the name. It's passing the name. It passes ID, but the ID gets translated. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'll explain that in a bit. All right, so it didn't work there. Let's go and stop over here and see if it's over here. So we got void, and then we have this call albums by genre, and then we come into this place, right? So let's see if we can, before everything else happens, do we get it in here, right? And I'm trying to isolate this issue, right? So, because right now we're getting this something went wrong thing, right? We're not getting a response to our data. When we go albums by genre, we're getting response.data is nothing, right? That doesn't make any sense. So let's see if we're getting it to this point, to here. So again, running it. This is just trouble isolation. All right. Again, let me click on rock. Let me go to inspect. And I get rock, right? That means it got to there, right? So far, so good. We're getting closer to isolate. So it's here. Let's see if it gets all the way to our service. So again, albums by genre, right? We'll save this piece. We'll go here to this one. And what I want to see is what happens when we're in here. Why am I doing all this? Because this is how we troubleshoot. We don't know where the problem is, right? So it's in here, and before we call our function, do we have it here? So I'll kind of put it into this nice little place. Console log genre. Uh-oh. Couldn't be here because it doesn't know anything about genre in here. We get our HTTP object, but what about in here? Can I get my object in here yet? So I'll say console log genre, right? And let's see if we're getting it inside of our service, right? So and oh, it's not even getting to our service in this case, undefined. Why? That means we have to go back one up, right? Because it says, okay, so albums by genre service. Let's make sure this is spelled correctly. Albums by genre service. And then I'm calling it by my albums by genre, right? So I'm going to say albums by genre service dot get albums by genre. That's what I'm doing. So I'm going to say dot get albums by genre. That's what I'm doing with a function, right? That's what's being called. Okay. And let's see. So we've got to this point. We got here. And then when we call the get albums by genre, right, we don't get a response back. So call albums by genre service. We're going to wait for the response. And inside this albums by genre, we're waiting for a response.data. All right, so let's see if it's here. Do we have response data? Do we have anything from our response data? Remember, we didn't get anything further on, so this should be a dud. Console log, and then response.data. So if I go save, and I go out here, and if I refresh, we still should get an undefined. Yeah, albums by genre. And this is the services albums by genre. Let's just make sure that things aren't cucked up. So I'm going to stop and start it off again. This is inside of our albums by genre controller, and I was seeing something else. So we have to make sure it's the right iteration of our code. Sometimes it gets cached. So you see the error? Yeah. So Jazz, and I go back to inspect, and I go to the console, undefined. And it says albums by genre. And if I hover over it, it says scripts, services, albums by genre. Scripts, services. But we're getting an albums by genre out of order, but did I leave a console log there? We did. So it's coming to here. Just to know where I'm at, I'm going to say something like, we're going to be inside services, right? Services, and we'll say plus genre. That's what this is. I'm going to start checking my code. This is why we have these things. Get albums by genre function. I made it an anonymous function last time. But we're not even getting there. Never mind. Okay, and what about our service? That's our control. Let's go look at our controller. And I'm going to inspect that one too. So that's going to be interesting. La la la. Album by genre controller with our scope. Albums by genre service. And a function that passes scope in there plus albums by genre service. That's pretty good. Scope in it, we hear function genre. We did get the everything is get albums by genre. And then get albums by genre. String void. Let call albums by genre service equal to albums by genre service dot get albums by genre. Ah, there it is. There it is. This has to be passed in right here. So I'm not passing it in. If I don't pass it into the call, well, then of course it won't give me anything, right? So that was what I missed. A little bit of tracing. All right, let's go back and see what we get now. If I refresh, we show you have no errors. There we go, Jazz, and then we get all this stuff. We get the Jazz stuff. There we go. Okay, let's go back and take away some of our console logs. I don't like leaving those in place because it's kind of an indicator that something might be wrong, and there's nothing wrong anymore. All right. So a little bit of troubleshooting there. Again, finger typing errors, things that I forgot to put in or whatever. So how does this work? If I go back to home, I can choose a genre from the list of genres. So I choose rock as an example. And then from there, I have a listing of albums that come up. So let's say Balls to the Wall. Click onto it, and bam, I have my album details now. Because I built that, I built that details before, right? This is with regular MVC. Wow, so a bit of a pain. You know, we got through it, but we've been able to build a web API with Angular. Let's go through some of the details here just to explain how this works, just before we stop. Okay, a couple things to note for this one. So the question was, well, Tom, I don't understand, right? You said I'm passing an ID. How does it get in the name, right? Because, again, you've got to figure out how this is all working, right? So if I go to my albums controller gives me the path. My path is listening for a string, rock, right? Because I'm overloading the getAlbum method. GetAlbum is here, GetAlbum is also here, and I'm overloading this method. One is an integer, and the other one is a string. They both can't be strings or integers, because then one would clash with the other. So I got to choose something else if I want to keep the same name, number one. So that's why I did this, right? String. So it's coming from there, and it's declaring the path. The path is API albums genre rock, or genre whatever. And this path, right, is being used by our service, which is this one. This is our service, API albums genre whatever, right? I had to establish it here before I had it work here, right? I couldn't do it the other way around. That's number one. Two, if I look at my my index.html, I get a bunch of albums. But the problem that we're having is we have to try and understand, where am I getting the stuff from my browse? Because when I go to browse, I click on this button, I go to browse, and I get an ID, okay? And I also get the genre name here, right? So an ID and a name. How do I get that browse result? How do I get that ID passed back in? Well, if you look at it, I passed in the entire genre object, not just an ID. ID is just being passed into the controller, right? Into the home controller, right? So if I look at the home controller, here's the home controller, it's taking ID, right? But it's passing it the genre that's related to that ID, right, back into the view. The view is my browse.cshtml. And this is the object that comes back, right? Now, I take this object, which is reflected in model, and I go model.name, and I take the name of that object, and through this ng-init method, pass it back into the controller. So even though I'm putting an ID, I'm switching it and getting back a name, right? Because I'm searching for the name that's related to the ID, right? And I need to do that because of the way I can't use the same method signature twice. I want to overload that method, once an ID and the other one's a string. I could have made my own method too if I wanted to, but there's no point if we can do it this way. And plus, it's a little bit more fun. And that's it in a nutshell. So learnings. Web API, it's built out of the box to do JSON or XML. You can choose which one you want to use, right? That's one thing. And it provides a data service for us to consume. By the way, anything can consume that service. A mobile device that's geared to look at JSON data doesn't know where it comes from, right? And if you have a service that can consume that data, you don't care. You don't care if the backend is SQL, Mongo, MySQL, whatever, Postgres. You don't care what it is. All you care about is that you have a JSON object you can consume. That's what the service does, right? So there's learnings. So producing the JSON object in with Web API can lead to some, especially when you have a bunch of tables that are very complex, and the way that they connect to each other and how they have cyclical references to the one to the other. you need to turn some things off inside the model by using the JSON ignore attribute, which we did. Okay, so that's what we did there. And then after we set all those things up, and Angular in its own folders, and we set up TypeScript to help us do some code hinting and everything else. By the way, it didn't help us that much because this is old Angular 1.x, and even so, it's not really structured nicely, right? By the way, Angular 2 still quite challenging. It's still not quite baked. Wait a little longer until they fix some more of the challenges, the bugs, and the workarounds they have to do. It's going to be a good one. It looks like it's going to be component-based as opposed to controller-based. You won't see any controllers in Angular 2, but you'll see lots of components, which is kind of cool. So that's neat. I like how that works. Angular 1.x is challenging. Why? Because you need to understand scope. It can be confusing the way that your directives link to your elements, right? We saw those too. All the regular things we see with Angular 1, it's a bunch of craziness. What's the advantage? Why would you use Angular 1.x as opposed to Razor? And some people ask that question. There's some really cool special effects you can do with Angular 1. Two-way data binding, we haven't tried that yet. A lot of things get updated on the fly. There's some really cool things. Let's see what happens if I was to add in a piece of data, right? For example, I only have a genre, these 10 genre, right? So if I go back to the genre and I run this object again, I have these 10. What if, I added another one? Oh yeah, because I went to the browse and I haven't set up a default, and I've just been a little bit lazy today in terms of setting up default and validation. What if I went to the genre list, right, as an example, and instead of having classical, jazz, rock, pop, disco, Latin, where's house music, man? There should be some kind of dance music on here, dance, right? And what if we wanted to add that in, right? How could I do it? Well, one thing is I could build the views to create or update. And there's a really cool tutorial that I was working with. It's not done by Microsoft, actually, if I was going to look at the tutorial for it. So if you want to follow along with the tutorial, if you go to, where the hell is it? Must be on my other side. It is under, there's a bunch of tutorials here for 2007. One of them is the one that I was looking at that kind of worked okay. Very simplistic by most, I think, was at C# corner. That's the one I'm kind of referencing for this one. And they really talk about how to connect with Web API. This is very simple, how to add AngularJS and everything else. So it's this article on C# corner. I'm recording it for you guys if you want to go in there. They also add items to the database, and they have a little script to do that. If you go further down, it talks about how to add. They did this old method of database first approach. I didn't. I chose this one, right? So I modified some of the stuff they did. They create all the entity data models. I didn't. And then they start getting something called subscribers. As an example with Web API, they have API scripts, controller, model, and service, module and service. I've just broken that out into different folders. That's what I did. So I didn't like the fact that they put it all under API scripts. Although you could have probably kept it into the same script. The same kind of functionality that you see here, right? I modified this stuff so it could work with us. And I also changed this app so that we automatically manually tap into the bootstrapping function of Angular, as opposed to what they did was they used automatic bootstrapping, which I didn't like, right? But I mean, for the most part, they have some pretty good structure. One thing they have is it says, here's the view. And further down, if you notice, they have some examples of the create operation. Here's I can do a create, right? So we have another div class as an example. And what we want to use is the create part. How do we do that? And they tell you how to do that. They have an ng click. And we access the save subs method, which is built in to the create. And then save subs is something that they're going to write with their controller. So here's their save subs method that they've added into the controller.js. What I would do is probably make it a separate controller altogether, right? That does the whole creation process, because I believe every controller should only have one and only one function. Too many controllers have lots of function, then gets really hairy. Now this works well, in my case, it works well in a multi-page application. If we did a single-page application, we may be thinking about doing one controller because we have one page. We don't want to mix the scope too much, right? Okay, so that's one thing we can do. So they did this whole thing, and they talked about how you can do the same kind of functionality. You can save, in this case, a subscriber. Instead of us saving a subscriber, we'd be saving up our album or whatever we're going to do. We can make multiple versions of this because one for album, one for artist, one for different versions, whatever we wanted to do, right? Okay, and here's the update operation. They have the whole thing carved out. So if you really wanted to use AngularJS, they have the entire operation here. Here's the delete operation. So the entire CRUD operation is here, right? And they give you an example of some simple screens that you can use that do everything. So I think, you know what? I think they did a pretty good, tight little article, kind of thing on how to do this stuff. I think it worked for me. I think some of these screenshots could have been a little nicer. If you click onto them, they're actually the same size. So I thought that I was going to get a bigger screenshot, but I didn't. And they don't really zoom in much. But other than that, I think, when I see a tutorial that really works and it was nice and easy for you guys, I've seen some really hard ones, and I'll show you another hard one that I saw. If I go to courses, some more difficult ones. This one here is pretty hard. This one does, it's the same guy, C# Corner, but they do ASP.NET with AngularJS Part 1, and they have several parts on this one. The problem with this tutorial is it's very complex. It's a multi-step tutorial. It probably would have taken us 2 days or so to do properly. It's neat for sure. It does things in a different way than the other one does. I like it, but it's also very long. And it does replace everything in MVC. It doesn't have Web API. It just uses MVC with AngularJS. So there's no Web API whatsoever. So that means, like, hey, what if I wanted to use just MVC, pure MVC with Angular, and I can do that as well. So lots of opportunities here. I think there's some really good learnings and the ability for us to mix up different technology, web technologies, to give the best user experience possible. Again, if it was me, I think that still Angular is a bit of a pig when it comes to learning. It's got a steep curve, lots of error potential. Even with the best code hinting, you're still going to have lots of trouble, right? And I really find Razor much more straightforward when it comes to using ASP.NET. In the future, do I think that we could use Angular 2 or Angular 1.58 with the component model? We could do it, but it's more complex, right? And it's actually better, right? Like if you actually look at the component model of Angular 1.5, it's better than this model where we use the controller-based model. The component-based model of 1.5 is actually kind of a middle step between kind of Angular 2 and Angular 1. So really good learnings, guys, and hopefully you'll have a chance to incorporate some of this if you want to. If you do incorporate it into your final project, I will give you a bonus, for your final project. But again, I have to warn you, it's not for the meat-hearted. All right, if you had problems with database or whatever, trust me, I've had, this is my third rehearsal of this one. It didn't go so well the first time, okay? Or the second, right? So just FYI, think twice before you jump into this one. Otherwise, okay, so a bit of administration. Remember that you're officially, everything is due tomorrow for the second part of your project, officially. Again, some leeway there for people who are working hard with other projects right now. Officially, next week on Thursday, for people who want to come in, there's the optional exam if they want to do it, if you feel that you need to do it. But for the most part, the things I've seen, for most people who have handed everything in, you're fine. You don't really need to do this thing. But as a bonus, if you want to get some extra marks, or if you didn't do so good in a lab or a test or something, it's not going to hurt you to come in, right? I'm going to make it 90 to 120 minutes. You're going to build something with MVC. Okay, so it's not like you're going to do it. There's no true, false, multiple choice. You're going to have access to some files. Everything's open book, open internet. Do what you have to do, and build away. You'll have some kind of little project to build within class time. That's it for me for today. I want to sit with some people that are here, maybe talk about their projects. I want to take a quick peek at what you've got going on, and then once I've taken a look at your stuff, you can go. Okay, so I'll see you guys next week. And it'll be the last week of our little semester. Thanks a lot, guys.